We've just spent about 2 weeks camping at Torreya State Park, about 13 miles or so from Bristol, Florida. And it was a fun way to kick off January. We're still in long sleeves, but we're not in multiple layers like we would have been in Michigan.
And for a little context, because you've probably never heard of Bristol, Florida, we're just south of the Georgia border and west of Tallahassee. So way over on the west side of the Panhandle, to the point where we're right next to the Apalachicola River. If you have any, you can look at a map and see where that is. And that is the dividing line between Eastern Time Zone and Central Time Zone.
Yeah, one quick tip, if you camp here, the river, because it's the dividing line, when we first showed up, our phones had different times on them. And I think it's because yours had grabbed from the tower across the river, which is in Central, and mine was still on Eastern, and then they flipped back and forth. So we locked the phones in on Eastern time to keep our lives a little more orderly. But something to keep in mind when you are here, that the park is in the Eastern time zone. We'll get into the features of the park a little bit, but the campground itself, I've been really happy with. It's small. There's only about 29 sites here, but it's been really quiet. Now, granted, it's, kind of calm in this part of the winter, I suppose, but the sites are nice. They're decent sized, not a lot of privacy between them, but I really kind of enjoyed it here.
It's been a really nice 2 weeks here. It was a little chilly, so while it was busy on the weekends and it was pretty packed on the weekends, the weeks maybe about half full. Quite a few people in tents, which I give more power to them, because it got down into like the low mid 30s a few nights that we were here, so it was chilly. Not really what you expect of Florida at this time of year, but because we're in the Panhandle, that is very expected up here, as opposed to Miami or Tampa or any places further south in Florida. But yeah, I think this has been a really nice place. In terms of the campsites, you also have 2 yurts and a cabin that you can rent. So if you don't have your own equipment, but you still want to come, there are 3 other camping options for you here. And yeah, not a lot of privacy, but the sites are good sized. So we've been really happy, and water and electric on site.
I was going to mention a max of 30 amp, but there's 30 amp and 20 amp available on each site. But it has been nice. We're not used to that in Michigan having water on site, and now we're kind of getting used to that. So I can see the benefit of that. And then there's a small but nice dump station at the front, so taking care of your tanks isn't a problem either. As far as other facilities, bathrooms were nice, small, but it's a small campground, so they don't need a lot. So it's been nice having those. There's one newer building, I think it's more ADA accessible. So it's actually got the toilet and the shower and sink and everything together. And then the other older building is more of your standard bathroom and shower configuration. And one nice thing about that bathroom building, though, is on the backside, there's a washer and dryer, which I wasn't expecting laundry facilities, but there's one washer, one dryer. But again, it's a small campground and it's cheap. It's like $1 for a load of wash.
Yeah. So, there's also 2 industrial sinks back there. I think they're more for the cleaning crew, but also if you were in a tent and cooking, or if you just had something messy, pots and pans, I did notice that there was 2 sinks back there that looks like you can use as well.
This is, I think, one of the first 9 state parks in Florida, and it was built, as we've found in many other states, by the Civilian Conservation Corps. And in fact, the registration building where the Rangers work was one of the original barracks for the CCC, and I think that's the only building left here.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the only buildings left in the entire park system, I believe they said. If we got that right, they said there's not very many original buildings left. So,
well, as you've noted in a number of our videos, a lot of the CCC camps, especially the wooden structures, they would burn them and tear them down on their way out, kind of a leave no trace policy. So it's interesting to see that building still being here and available to go into and look at. And they've got some displays up with some of the history of the park, so it's neat to see that. One of the attractions here at Torreya State Park is to see the Gregory House, an old plantation home from the 1800s that ties in not only history with the plantations in that era, but again, the CCC, because they moved the house.
The Gregory House was owned by Jason Gregory and his family. He wasn't anybody special, just a local businessman and resident of the local area, but had a plantation with slaves and farms and crops and everything. And obviously, after the end of the Civil War and when slavery was abolished and the Great Recession kicked in and all of these things and the family sort of dispersed, the house was abandoned. And over time, it sort of became looted and run down. And in the 1930s, it ended up being donated to the state and to the CCC. So in 1935, when the CCC was building Torreya State Park, they went and dismantled board by board the entire Gregory House, labeled, numbered, put it on a barge, floated it across the river, and reconstructed it in its current location on the bluff in the state park overlooking the Apalachicola River. That was a pretty impressive feat for 1935 for sure, but it's just really cool because they were able to salvage this old plantation house that we can now tour today to get a glimpse of what life was like in like the 1850s.
And they do a really nice guided tour. They'll have a ranger take you through it. I think it was $3 a person to get in there, but they spend a lot of time. You can go through the entire house. They've sort of rebuilt the look of it with many different furnishings from the era. There's nothing originally. I think the one bed is from one of the daughters, one of the adult daughters who used it, and that's all that's left there from the family. But it's neat just to see stuff from that era and be able to see that. It's in a beautiful setting on that bluff. It would have been interesting to see it really down close to the river. And in fact, one of the interesting things historically is that it was built up on 5-foot pilings initially. So when the river flooded, it could go underneath. And one additional thing is they used to have a giant live oaks on either side of the house, and they literally roped the house to those trees just in case it flooded too much. And I guess it did at least once. Yeah. Actually lifted it up off the pilings, and the trees held it in place so it didn't float away. Who knew
you could tie your house up? Apparently it's a thing. But we'll get into this a little bit with the trails, but this park took a severe beating in 2018 from Hurricane Michael. And that house survived. So that's really cool because when a number of other things at this park were pretty much destroyed, the house was still standing after all was said and done. So testament to the construction of that house originally and the reconstructed version.
When you're done touring the Gregory House, and we do recommend that, that was a lot of fun to learn that history, you can take advantage of being right near one of the 2 loop trails in the state park. There's about, 16 miles of trails total. Each of the loops is about 6 miles, and then there's some additional trails along the way. Spurs and things and access points. But one of the advantages of starting out from behind the Gregory House is that you go right past some Civil War emplacements that were there for cannons to watch the Apalachicola River in case of invasion.
That was really neat to see. The Apalachicola River, at least in this area, never really saw any battle, but it was used as a thoroughfare for transporting goods, and they didn't know if it was going to have, the Union coming down and trying to bombard it. So they dug in, it was a battery was here, and they dug in 6 areas for the guns to set. So at different times, there were 6 guns set along the river. And basically for a mile in each direction, they could have hit any boat that was coming down. Today, you can still see the depressions where they dug out and had the cannon sitting, as well as the humps in between that were used for the underground ammunition storage. Now, you can't really access any of it. They've got it all blocked off because it's preserved and protected and they don't want anything happening to it. But you can really see those indentations, and that's just really cool to think that that's from the 1860s. I mean, that it's still here, and they've got everything labeled with some interpretive signs. So make sure that you head down that trail for sure. Even if you don't do the whole loop, it's just probably maybe a half a mile walk just to see that part.
The 2 loop trails are quite different, actually, here at Torreya State Park. And the one that you can get to from behind the Gregory House and numerous other places is different because it's not quite as intense as the other one. In fact, one is the Torreya Loop Trail, and one is the Torreya Challenge Trail. And the name gives it away. But the regular trail, really, what's nice about that is you mentioned you could just do part of it to see the Civil War stuff, but there's a lot of different access points. So you can go in and out of the loop in a lot of different places. You could do part of the loop one day, part of the loop another day, and you don't have to worry about it. But that was nice in there. And not too bad in terms of the hiking skill you would need to go through there.
The day we were out, which was a Saturday, we saw everybody from like 5-year-old kids to senior citizens. So it's definitely a trail that anybody can do because of those access points. So even if you were to hit a more strenuous section with some steep inclines, and despite the fact that this is Florida and you'd think it's super flat, this part of the state actually has some elevation because you've got the river down below and then the bluffs up here. So you are climbing in a few places, not like rock climbing, but you might want to bring a hiking pole or just be prepared, the right shoes and everything. But it is accessible to pretty much all ages. We really liked it. There's a lot to see in terms of like the foliage and the different tree specimens. Now, again, I mentioned the hurricane. The majority of this park's tree canopy was wiped out completely during the hurricane. So it used to be this super dense hardwood canopy of, I'm not even going to be able to name all the types of trees, but it's like evergreens and other things that are native to Florida. And now it is completely wide open. Those trunks are just snapped off like toothpicks. And it's really sad, actually, to think about it. So the vegetation that's on the bottom of the floor is sort of regrowing and taking over. So it's a much different kind of look and feel as it used to be if you've been here before and what you're going to see now. It's also winter, so some things are just dead because it's winter and they'll come back. But really the majority of the park just changed from that hurricane.
Well, the ranger we talked to was saying that it's still neat to look out from the bluff, and you actually have a very different look. It's now more of a vista when you look out over it. And she said, years ago you would have looked out and not really seen anything but treetops. You would have seen the canopy, and so it's amazing the amount of damage because that Hurricane Michael was so strong when it got up here. And one of the things I read said that when they got into the park after the hurricane to start the cleanup, they had to clear 500 trees just from the entrance road. That doesn't even count touching the trails. And so I can only imagine how much work they've put in. And there's still a lot of felled trees down there, and they're working as best they can to stay on top of it. But it just a tremendous amount of damage.
The one thing, too, we haven't really touched on is that it is Florida and everything is out to kill you. So in this park alone, the following warning signs are apparent: black bears, copperhead snakes, ticks, and alligators. All at the same time. So you really have to be on the lookout for everything. So proper footwear is very much required. Closed-toed shoes, because you don't know what kind of snakes you're going to, that might be hiding under leaves. Bug repellent, especially for ticks. We definitely saw ticks on us a number of times throughout the trail system. We never did see any alligators. Actually, we never saw anything but the ticks, quite frankly, but there are signs because the Apalachicola River runs literally right next to the trail in some spots. And if it's flooding, that water is going to come up. So on a nice sunny day, I could totally see the gators coming up and sunning themselves. Now, they shouldn't attack you, but you just never know if you come around the bend and startle them, I suppose. So better be safe than sorry, but don't let that prohibit you from going on the trails, but just don't let your kid go jump in the water.
The trees that have fallen down and the new undergrowth is starting to grow has made the Torreya Challenge Trail that much more challenging. And I think it even says it's arduous on the sign.
It's difficulty.
It's difficulty. They have a typo in there.
Small typo.
Small typo in the sign that we laughed at. But we spent pretty much a good chunk of the day completing that trail, and we kind of vlogged about it as we were going because there was so much happening that day. So let's see what happened on the Challenge Trail. This is the beginning of the Torreya. Well, it is the end because it's a loop. This is the Torreya State Park Challenge Loop. We did the regular loop yesterday. This is the Challenge Loop. They claim that it's a lot of inclines up and down.
We'll see.
We'll see. There's a very scary sign at the beginning that basically warns you to turn back now. But you talked to a ranger who said that was really more of a warning for people who hadn't been out in a while.
Yeah, they said they get a lot of people who are unprepared, aren't really big hikers, will come out here right before the park closes in heels and shorts and half a bottle of water. And it's like a 6-7 mile trail. It's going to take you multiple hours. So basically it was just their warning so that they didn't have to come out and rescue you.
But for people like us who hike with too much stuff on our back and in our packs, we should be fine.
Let's hope. So we'll see if we make it back here.
In 2018, when Hurricane Michael came ashore and came all the way up to the northern part of the Panhandle of Florida, Torreya State Park took a huge hit because it was still so strong when it got here. And as you hike through, this is the Challenge Trail that we're on today, you can kind of see behind me and above me, and I'll get a better shot here in a second, how many of the trees are simply snapped off from the winds that came through here. And I bring that up because if you haven't been here since then, I'm sure this would have looked very different, particularly in the summer. If you're hiking, it would have been full hardwood with a canopy and a lot of shade. And if you're out here now, it's going to be pretty wide open. And there's a lot of sort of scrub brush type stuff growing and different vines and things on the ground that weren't able to grow before because of the shade from the canopy. But now it's exposed to sun and it's growing like crazy. And we had one of the rangers tell us that when they're trying to keep the trails clear, they had to work through all the trees that had fallen, and now they're having a constant battle with the low stuff that's growing and getting across the trail really quickly. So something to keep in mind. Our first obstacle.
Okay, not so bad.
It's hard when the person testing all the logs is taller than you.
Yes, and can take larger steps. And anyways, but I made it. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Just watch that first step.
So we've done some climbs and we did our first mud pit. And we just now got to the challenge loop. It's all connected, and the sign says it's 6 miles total, but there is an access trail to get here, and we think it's not quite 3/4 of a mile to get you to this signpost that says, oh, look, you're starting on the loop. So here we go. That bridge has seen better days.
Yeah.
One of the trail apps I had, somebody commented on some of the water crossings not being repaired yet. Hopefully this is as bad as it gets.
It's actually pretty sturdy.
Okay. We ran into another hiker who had come the opposite direction. And he mentioned there was overgrown in a few spots. And to watch for ticks because he kept finding them on his pants. And we've been doing regular stops with tick checks to be sure. Did you wait until I was all the way across in case it collapsed?
I did, in fact, just in case. That only one of us needs to die out here.
On one of the trail apps, people commented about this challenge trail being more challenging in some sections when it's overgrown, especially because the blazes aren't all that populated, or however you say that. We just hiked up a hill, so I'm tired. There aren't as many blazes as there should be. Well, the ranger said the part of the problem is when they do paint, the bark will fall off, or if they do the little medallions, the trees keep falling over, and ironically, it tends to be the ones that they put the blazes on. So I've noticed they're starting to do more ribbons out here. Because we're here in the winter, we're here in mid-January, and a lot of the foliage is down because it's dormant for the winter, it's a little easier to see everything. But it seems like they're trying to do what they can to keep up with blazes, either with we're seeing new badges or we're seeing a lot more ribbons in certain areas. I'm assuming those are going to last a little longer. So if you keep your wits about you, and kind of look for the trail and watch for the blazes, you're going to see something. We haven't really had too many spots where we've been like, I don't see anything. Earlier in the trail, you were fighting to keep your feet dry. Now you're talking about wading in the river.
Well, without my shoes, of course.
It does look cool and refreshing, and we're almost to the end of the loop. Then we have to take the extension, and then we have to walk back to camp.
It's not too far.
Is this sturdy enough for us to be on here at the same time?
I hope so.
Yeah, it's sturdy-ish. Well, we're back at the beginning of the Torreya Challenge Trail, which is the end, because we said at the
beginning of the end.
We said it as one way in and one way out. And we learned that this is actually an access trail that's about, I don't know, what, 3/4 of a mile to get to the challenge trail.
And I think that was the worst part of the entire thing.
Well, coming out when you're done, it's a pretty good climb from the loop to get up the access trail and over the ridge and back down here at the beginning. So, and they don't tell you, like the sign at the beginning warns you. I thought it was kind of funny because usually hiking trails are like easy, moderate, hard, that kind of thing. This one was arduous. And there were sections that were, because it's a little brushy in there right now, and there's just some different obstacles to get over. But, so I thought, yeah, you got to be prepared. Take your supplies, be ready for a pretty good workout at times.
I think it's just because whether you go clockwise or counterclockwise, it doesn't matter. You're coming back up this steep thing at the end no matter what. So you're going to be tired no matter what at the end. I think that's just what we weren't really prepared for. The ranger did warn us, but I'm not sure we really grasped what she meant until we saw it. One of the key things you have to watch for in this area is ticks. And we're here in the winter time, and we still had quite a few we had to deal with. And I've read on some of the trail apps that, certainly in the summer and stuff, you're going to have a lot of them. But we did a number of stops and checks and took ticks off of our pants, that kind of thing. So, and we're going to do a closer check when we get back tonight. So it's something to keep in mind. Make sure you bring your typical first aid kit in addition to all your water and your food. We had a minor little incident just because there's a lot of trees down, just still, again, from the hurricane and just the general dead trees that you see in a forest. And you have to go over and under a lot of them. And some of them aren't necessarily at the right or wrong height, depending on how you want to do it. So going over between all the stuff Ari was carrying, he kind of slipped off and got a little skin rash. So just make sure that... I got
The bark had some bite on that tree. So yeah, I got a little banged up. But you know, it was one of those things where we don't always carry the full first aid kit. I carry some, you know, Band-Aids and stuff usually with us no matter what. And this time I realized it's an arduous trail and everybody warned us about it being tough. So I thought, well, let's throw the whole kit into the backpack. And I'm glad we did, because I had some, you know, kind of antibacterial cream and Band-Aids, and so it worked.
It's just, it is always just a good reminder. You never know, even if you're going to be out just for a short amount of time, how quickly something can go wrong, whether it's for yourself or you come along and somebody else has had an incident. So just, you know, again, being prepared. But this was actually one of those hikes where we didn't really go too, you know, if you've watched our hikes before, our 6-mile hike is usually like a 12-mile hike. And today we were within about a mile of it. So that's not too bad with some camera movement and this, that, and the other thing. But overall, a good hike. Again, it just, the amount of damage from the hurricane and the snapped off trees that you can just, these huge trees that are just like snapped like toothpicks. It's just sad and crazy. But now you see all this undergrowth that's building. So it'll be a little bit different landscape for a few years here.
I think I've mentioned a couple times at the beginning and here when we got out at the end, one thing about this challenge loop trail that's different than the other loop trail that's here in the park is there is only one way in and out. And it is this steep climb. It's a steep climb going in and it's a steep climb coming out. It's uphill both ways. So keep that in mind, because the other one you can kind of, there's some cutoffs where you can cut off some of the distance, there's some shortcuts, and there's a couple of exit strategies that you can follow. But what here, until you get to the halfway point, I suppose you could come back. But once you hit the halfway point, you might as well just keep going, because it's one continuous loop. And maybe that's why we didn't have extra mileage, because there weren't so many little spurs for us. We didn't examine little spurs.
Definitely didn't see very many people. Like I said, only 2 people out here today, whereas yesterday on the trail that's closer into the main part of the park, just tons of people. It was so busy yesterday with families and kids and dogs and just people out hiking. So that's definitely the more user-friendly trail on that side.
And we usually kind of make fun a little bit of, you know, people warning us about, oh, that's a really tough hike, and we don't think it's usually that bad. This one was a little tougher. So be prepared. When we say be prepared, we're serious on this one. It's not for the faint of heart, but it could be a lot of fun for a lot of people. So consider getting out here and trying it out.
Yeah, and it is Florida, so heat, humidity. Like, I ended up in my long sleeves all day just because of the brush and the tanglement. So I just had to drink more water just because I was a little more hot than normal. But that was my being prepared.
We did see a little bit of wildlife. We saw some deer out there, plenty of lizards.
Lots of little gecko lizards.
We think a turkey vulture flew over. I don't know if that was a sign that they were, you know, watching us to see if we made it or not. But other than that, no real wildlife.
No gators, bears, snakes, what have you. Just some geckos.
And ticks. Watch for the ticks.
They're still out. See, Florida's still out to kill you.
Consider the Challenge Loop Trail. It's a good one at Torreya State Park. So that trail definitely was challenging. It was a lot of fun, though, by the time we were all done. And I'm happy to say that my arms have actually healed up quite quickly. So it's not quite as painful as it was a few days ago. But that was a lot of fun to do that. And one of the things we did, because you had brought this up, is we kept trying to spot the actual Torreya tree, which is what this park is named for.
There are very few of them left. It is now a critically endangered species. There are less than 200 of them in the park, and none of them are cone producing. So at this point, they're just trying to take new saplings. Is that the right word? Cuttings to make new saplings and planting them around the park. But they're all from essentially the same family now, and so they're not really sure how they're going to work. But the Torreya tree was known for being rot resistant, or is known for that. And so when there were thousands of them in the park, and the early inhabitants thought, well, this is great. And they made everything from it, their houses, their fence posts. They thought they'll be on forever. Well, obviously over time, things happen. There was some fungal infection, then the hurricane took more out, and now there's just very few of them left. But there are a handful. You can see a few of them around the park where they've put wire around the bottom to prevent like the deer and the other animals from rubbing on them to try to protect them. So hopefully maybe you can spot 1 or 2 while you're out on the trails. So in addition to the trails and the campground, Torreya State Park has your traditional other park amenities, day use area, playground, pavilions, youth camp, primitive campsites, day use parking and all that stuff. So, in addition to all the other stuff, you can just come here for the day, check out all the trails, check out the campground, the CCC building, the Gregory House, and all the things, because as we saw, it was a very popular place on a sunny 70-degree weekend.
This has been a really good introduction. Neither of us have really stayed in the Panhandle of Florida before, so this was all new to us, and I'm glad we chose Torreya State Park. It was, like I said, a great introduction to this part of Florida, so get here if you can. Keep on trekking.
And we'll see you out there.